Yo, what's going on, guys? It is Insanity here, and welcome to today's video. In today's video, we're going to be making a boss tier list for Tiny Tina Wonderlands. Last time I made a tier list, you guys really voiced your opinions on it, and honestly, I didn't expect that. I don't know why, because everyone's entitled to their own opinion. But you guys really did do that, and it honestly made me think differently about Borderlands 3 back then. And it actually made me want to make a build, and my only build I ever made on this channel. My intent of making this tier list isn't really to get like knowledge and stuff like that from other people, but I want to know what you guys think about these bosses in this game. Some of them are memorable and some of them aren't, and let's just go through the list right now. So I'm just gonna go in order. So starting off with number 1, which is Ribula. Ribula is probably my least favorite boss in this game. This doesn't mean Ribula is necessarily a bad boss. I like Ribula more than other first bosses in the other Borderlands games like Shiv or Knuckle Dragger. Ribula has good boss mechanics and is a good introduction into this game, but in my opinion, he doesn't really compare to the other bosses in this game, and that's why he is at F tier. Moving on to the second boss in the game, Zombos. So I threw Zombos in D tier. She is a good boss and is a good segue into the good chunk of the game, but this boss has a lot in common with Ribula, just being simple, not very memorable in my opinion. This boss is extremely simple, doesn't really have much boss mechanics to it. It's basically a second introduction to the game. That's the way I look at Zombos. Zombos is a great farm, don't get me wrong. You could get a lot of world drops from Zombos. You could get money from Zombos. Good XP. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how the bosses act and how they are. I should have probably explained that before, but that's how I'm ordering these bosses, is how their boss mechanics are compared to other bosses in other games and how memorable they are, not how good their farms are. I could make another video about their farms in the future, but I wasn't going to focus on that because I don't have much knowledge on every boss in the game. Alright, now moving on to the third boss, which is Banshee. The first higher tier boss goes to Banshee at B tier. There's a pretty good build up to this boss in the story and is a pretty memorable, like, really first big boss fight in my opinion. The boss fight itself has really good mechanics and makes it feel like a boss fight. As opposed to Ribula and Zombos, they were just kind of like pushovers in my opinion, but Banshee really isn't. First time fighting Banshee, I remember when she started closing in the arena and I didn't know and I immediately went down. It was scary, yeah. There's a lot to learn from the boss and it took me honestly 2 tries to even beat it. It has good mechanics and is a very memorable boss, and that's why it's at B tier. The fourth boss in the game is Lachance, and Lachance is actually going down to D tier. Lachance does have personality and is probably my favorite arc in the game, or whatever chapter of the game. The whole pirate theme and everything, I really like that part. But Lachance's boss fight is similar to Zombos and Ribula. Not really much like overwhelming like boss features about him. He's just kind of like a badass enemy. He is basically just Ribula with 2 health bars and isn't really the most boss fight boss, if that makes sense. Moving on to Drill. Drill is going to be in A tier. This, in my opinion, is the first massive boss fight of the game. This really marks the halfway point, getting halfway through the ocean or whatever in the story, and just actually you feel like you're making progress. 3 phases to this fight make it a true challenge. Being resistant to a few different elements in the process makes you think on the fly. Plus, the character design is pretty scary, and that makes it very memorable. He definitely isn't the hardest boss in the world, but his sheer size makes him a core memory in the game for me, and that's why he is at A tier. Moving on to Son of a Witch. Oh boy, do I have things to say about him. Now, first off, I'm placing him in C. A lot of people probably would place him in F, but I'm placing him in C just because he is difficult. At the end of the day, isn't a boss supposed to be difficult? It's supposed to mark an end of a chapter or something like that, the end of a mission line or whatever. And he does that. He's a good boss fight. Yeah, he's a very annoying one to farm and whatnot, you know, but when you're first fighting Son of a Witch, it could be pretty difficult and honestly could halt your progress a little bit. And I mean, isn't that what a boss is supposed to do? I know I said that before, but a boss is supposed to be difficult, and that's exactly what he is. Now, the only reason he's not higher is because, yes, I don't find him fun. I don't find him fun to fight, but he is a good challenge, and that's why he's not at the bottom. Now, I'm pretty biased towards this next boss, which is Nightmare. I made a video claiming Nightmare was the best money farm in the game, and then, you know, a lot of you told me that he isn't, which I can kind of agree with, but kind of disagree with. Nightmare is a really good moon orb farm or money farm. Even if you say it's not, it is. He's just good. There are better alternatives, but boss-wise, I think out of all the bosses in the game, besides the exception of one, which isn't even a main story boss, I think Nightmare takes the cake for best money farm. But that's not the point. We're not talking about farms. We're talking about the boss fight. Nightmare, honestly, isn't really, like, memorable to me. I remember, like, you fight Nightmare during the big climax of the game, you know? You're at the bottom of the pyramid, you're going to the Dragonlord, you're getting close to his lair. And it's kind of like the boss before the end of the game, before you fight the final boss. Well, that's exactly what it is. And these bosses tend to be overshadowed by the big final boss at the end, and that's exactly what happens in Nightmare's case for me, and that's why it's at C tier. Just simply overshadowed from the Dragonlord. Speaking of the Dragonlord, our first S tier in the video. The Dragonlord is my favorite final boss out of all the Borderlands games. Yes, even Warrior. I like him more than Warrior. And to top it all off, the Dragonlord is one of my favorite characters in the Borderlands franchise. Hell, I even have him as a desk toy. He's a very memorable character, has a very good story in my opinion to him. Even though it's just a board game character, he has a lot of life to him. And he honestly lives up to that final boss potential with spawning in Bernadette near the end of the fight. All of it is just a great surprise when you first fight the Dragonlord. And yeah, that's why he's an S tier. He lives up to the final boss name. Alright, so that's all the main story bosses out of the way. I am going to include the side bosses in here, and we'll graze upon the raid bosses, but let's just start with the side bosses. So starting off the side boss list, there's only 4 of them, but Vorkanar. Vorkanar is in B tier simply because he's a decent surprise for a side boss. He's difficult enough where you could potentially go down a couple times and lose the fight a couple times. The arena is cool and reminds me a lot of the Agonizer 9000 from Borderlands 3. Obviously, not as good as the Agonizer. The Agonizer, hands down, is probably my favorite boss out of any of the Borderlands games. Dragonlord's up there, but Agonizer is probably my favorite, and I might be a little biased towards Vorkanar because it kind of reminds me of him, but that's why he's in B tier. Moving on to Parasite, I threw Parasite in C tier just because there's no personality to this fight. You're just fighting a giant floating mushroom. That's about it. There isn't much to say about him besides, for whatever reason, he's the boss everyone tests their builds on. Not too sure why. I don't know if he's tanky or anything. I don't think he's that tanky. Whenever I fight him, he's not that tanky. But I don't know. I don't really like the boss all that much. I don't fight him all that much. So yeah, kind of falls flat for me. Like Parasite, I threw Celissa in S tier. This fight has a lot more personality than the Parasite fight, yes. But I just can't find myself to put it on the same tier as Banshee and Vorkanar. I don't think the Celissa fight is as good as those two. But I also don't think it is as bad as Zombos or LeChance. So I just tossed it in the middle at C. That Celissa isn't really all that fun, and I don't find myself going to fight her all that much, hence why she's in C tier. All right, moving on to Castor. Castor is going to be my second S tier of the video. I love Castor, and he was a straight up surprise when I first fought him because, I mean, when you're first playing through a Borderlands game, you're going to do all the side missions, right? So I'm just doing all these side missions, picking up the pointless ones, the ones where you gotta just like run a few errands for a dude, and that's it. And that's what happened with Castor. I was just doing the mission. I didn't know. I didn't look up any of this beforehand. I was just playing, and I walk into a room and a massive skeleton comes out of a portal, and I gotta fight it. And it was really cool sound design, really cool character design, even though he's like a normal skeleton mage. Being a beefed up skeleton mage is pretty cool. His attacks are very punishing. I find him a very good boss fight and my favorite side boss fight in the game. And since this video is getting really long, I am going to include these raid bosses, but there honestly really isn't much to say about them. Yes, they're raid bosses, but in my opinion, the raid bosses from all the other games are more memorable than these 4. But I mean, the Maker's really good. The Maker's a fun fight, and it's definitely a challenge to get to fight the Maker. Can be a little annoying, but I mean, yeah. But as I said, there isn't much to say about them, considering you find them all in the same place, and other Borderlands raid bosses are a lot more memorable than these 4. I don't really care which one I fight in the end when I'm spawning them in. If I find the blue symbol, I'll fight it. If I find the yellow one, I'll fight it. Or the green one, I'll fight it. And if I happen to find all 3, sure, I'll fight the Maker. That's how I feel about them, so I'm just gonna group them all really quickly, and this is what it looks like. This is where I place them. Not really gonna explain my placing on them, just because they're just raid bosses. You know, obviously a raid boss is going to be high up on a list. It's meant to be hard. It's meant to be a boss fight. It's meant to be memorable. But yeah, that's going to be it for today's video, guys. If you guys did enjoy, please leave a like, as it also does help this channel grow. And subscribe if you are new for more Wonderlands content like this. I mean, this is my first tier list. If you guys want me to make another tier list about something else, go ahead. Just leave that suggestion down below. And let me know your guys' tier list. I'm going to include a link in the description so you guys can make your own tier lists. And yeah, that's gonna be it for today's video, guys. It's been Insanity. I'll see you guys later.